Did you ever notice the Hollywood left is never guilty of hate speech? Welcome, it's the Newsbusters podcast. I'm Tim Graham, your executive editor. With me today, MRC-TV movie maven Nick Kangatis.
How we doing?
Telling me there was a big fat Greek wedding 3.
There was. I mean, nobody saw it, but...
Okay, and joining us, of course, our special guest, Christian Toto, proprietor of the website Hollywood in Toto for all of your Hollywood evaluating needs, and author of the 2022 book, Virtue Bombs. I think we had you on the podcast when the book came out, as a matter of fact.
Think so.
I wanted to start, Merry Christmas to everyone. Some people's Christmas was a little ruined by the Jimmy Kimmel alternative Christmas message that they broadcast on Channel 4 in Britain. And, of course, it was all about himself and his year in being censored, apparently. And so the main topic was, from a fascism perspective, this has been a really great year. Tyranny is booming over here. That was his summary, Christian. What did you think of that?
I mean, it's exactly what we expected him to say. It's so maddening. The fact that he has become this faux free speech hero is really frustrating because for the last 8 to 10 years, he hasn't said boo while cancel culture wiped out comedians, while the Biden administration censored people's speech online, while the Twitter files ran amok, while sensitivity readers were excising words and phrases from popular novels. I mean, I can go on and on. And Jimmy Kimmel, and he's not alone here, but he and his Hollywood pals said nothing about it. And now, because he was suspended for a week for misleading the public about a major news story, the death of Charlie Kirk, now he's wrapping himself in the flag and saying he's a free speech martyr and that, Trump is bringing doom and gloom. It's so frustrating. And I know you guys do it far better than me, but looking at the corrupt media landscape, I keep changing the words I need to describe them. At first it was biased, then it was overt, and now it's corrupt. I almost think corrupt and their bias isn't even strong enough at this point. So yeah, it was frustrating to hear what he had to say.
Nick, it was 4 shows. He missed 4 shows, and they treated it like 1984 descended.
Well, this Christmas message, I'm surprised he can still get his head through the door. He was busy the last, however many years, bashing Trump every single night. It wasn't about jokes. It was about his politics. And he was crying every other week while reading Chuck Schumer's words.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it is not, you can't call it comedy. I think that's part of the problem. Now, Christian, you wrote about his contract extension, but they only gave him a year. Yeah. Which you were like, obviously, after this whole mess, they couldn't cancel him like Colbert, but they only gave him a year. And you were like, well, that shows you the lack of confidence in Kimmel and in the format at this point.
Yeah, I mean, even Kimmel himself said, I think a year or two ago, that this whole landscape, this late night format probably won't survive another decade. I think the end will come much sooner than that. But yeah, listen, if you want to lock in your talent, give Jimmy Kimmel credit. To survive on late night is very competitive, very hard. And he's done it for maybe 2 decades. I mean, He's had a long run. I have to give him credit for that. But if you want to lock in your talent, which is I would think anyone would want to do, you don't give him a year. You give them much longer. You say, listen, you're in. We want to be in the Jimmy Kimmel business. So the fact that they did that, and I think one of the questions, I don't know the economics behind the scenes, but I'm certainly curious about it. If the Late Show at Stephen Colbert was reportedly losing $40 million a year because the budget's too big and the staff is too big and they're not bringing the revenue, what are the numbers behind Jimmy Kimmel Live? Is that show profitable? And if it's losing money, how much? And if it's losing money, why would you even keep it on the air? I mean, I thought this was show business.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes for them sort of an extension of the news division, as bizarre as that is. Just as bizarre that the View is an extension of ABC News. Kimmel is an extension of ABC News. I mean, when we look at the late nights comedy, quote unquote, sector overall, I mean, we just came out with a study where the number of conservative the jokes about conservatives, 92% of all political jokes are about conservatives, which was up from 82% last year, because I guess because we had an election, they had to make a few jokes about Democrats. But yeah, obviously, Kimmel said, I don't want Republicans to watch my show. He was very explicit about this is a show by Democrats for Democrats.
Well, you would think coupled with that, you have Colbert, which is in New York, if I believe, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
And you have Kimmel, which is in L.A.
Mm-hmm.
So you basically have to ask yourself, which one is more expensive to put on, L.A. or New York City? And with the policies that they have in place in those areas, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot when you alienate half your audience before you even say a word.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people refer to Johnny Carson. You know, Johnny Carson said, I couldn't be political. Well, it was a different era. You know, at that point, when we were growing up, there wasn't streaming. There wasn't all sorts of alternative options for people to go to. And Johnny Carson really wanted to rule the roost and be watched by 50 or 60% of the country, anybody who's up at that time. And so maybe it made more sense then to not be as political. And yeah, Johnny Carson's humor was gentler, you know, the way that Jimmy Kimmel's or Jimmy Fallon's is gentler than the others.
Well, I don't think it's just even that. If you look back in the 80s and even the early 90s when Johnny Carson was finishing up, you had Carson and you had Letterman. Now, both of those places were places, if you were a stand-up comedian, to get your name out there. And like I've said in previous episodes before, with Johnny Carson, if you did your 5-minute set and then you were called over to the couch, you were a made man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Now, Fallon's still having some stand-ups on, but yeah, they never quite do that because they put them on like in the last 10 minutes of the show.
They're the pre-approved stand-ups.
Yeah.
They're the pre-approved ones. They're the ones that'll get like the specials on Netflix, not the ones that like Dave Chappelle just puts on just because it's a Friday, but you know, the ones that are pre-approved and they'll get their little cut and then they go on Fallon. They might have one or two funny jokes, but after that, it's kind of comedy. Stand-up comedy has left the late night arena.
You're much more
it's amazing because stand-up comedy is really booming right now.
Yes.
Clean comedians, rebel comedians. So this should be the moment where late night TV is breaking these stars and giving a voice to the next generation of superstars. And they don't do that. They don't have any interest in that. It's fascinating. But I think one of the underreported stories is that with Carson and Leno, The Tonight Show was supreme late night outlet. I mean, it always ruled the ratings roost. And Jimmy Fallon is third to distant third, if not worse, all the time. And you know what he serves up is a kinder, gentler, progressive comedy show. And so I think if you really are progressive, you don't want that. You want the Colbert, you want the Kimmel. You don't want a warmed over guy who's just hitting the right, but doing it gently. So I think Fallon's whole approach is just wrong.
And then you look at shows like the number one live comedy show on the planet right now is every Monday night on YouTube, Kill Tony. And it's live. They don't have a script. You come up for sick, you get your name pulled out of a bucket, and it could be your first time doing stand-up comedy, or you could be doing it for 15 years, but that's the fun of it. And then you get interviewed afterwards, and then they can mold you and see, hey, this guy could be a star, or you should never do this again. But the crowd loves the failures just as much as they love the people who are successes.
Well, it's also authentic and it's unexpected. There's the element of surprise. When you watch Jimmy Kimmel, you don't know the jokes per se, but you know the angle, the attack. You know most of what's going to happen. It's just got to fill in the words, fill in the blanks. And I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, podcasting is so exciting, because it feels raw, it feels vulnerable, it feels authentic. And that's all missing from late night TV. You know, even back in the day, Johnny Carson might have some animals on that crawl over his desk, or some of the big superstars would do things in an unexpected fashion, or a Don Rickles would shake things up completely. There was a sense of the unknown and excitement there, even though it might anger Johnny Carson. Kind of had a thin skin, the guy, according to behind the scenes reports. But it was something you had to tune in because you didn't know what you'd get.
Well,
and
Carson knew how to feed the comedians. Every time Rodney Dangerfield was in that chair, Carson would ask him specific questions that would set up specific one-liner jokes that Rodney could just rattle off one after the other.
Yeah.
Go Go ahead.
There's a new book out called Love, Johnny Carson. I just interviewed the author for my podcast, and it's full of great information, but it also shows why he was the king. The attention to detail, sparking these different conversations, having their people go to the comedy clubs and like I said, discover new talent. It really was an exquisite process that made that show what it was. And I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And also, it may sound too obvious to even say, but let's say it, the lack of diversity on the writing staffs of these shows, I can't even imagine what it's like. I mean, does anyone ever raise their hand and say, President Biden, he went viral this week for a clip that was pretty rough. Maybe we should. Oh, sorry. I'm just kidding. We'll do it.
Well, you have to think all the writers that got laid off from Vox and BuzzFeed are probably the writers, because they have 30, 40 writers on these late night shows. So half of these writers got to be from defunct liberal left leaning propaganda outlets.
And then the shop is run by, Mrs. Kimmel, Mrs. Kimmel was notorious for being very unhappy when anybody cracked wise about Hillary's pantsuits. So, I think we know what we're getting. I wanted to take a detour now. It's still late night comedy in a sense, but when Donald Trump decided to add his name to the Kennedy Center, which drove them all insane, as you might expect, Nathan Lane did a bit on Colbert. Let's take a look.
The new season that he's preparing is very troubling. Oh. Like tomorrow night, they have a youth choir made up entirely of Elon Musk's children. Because Hamilton canceled its engagement, they're producing Lee Greenwood's all-rap musical tribute to Ronald Reagan, starring Kanye West. It's called Trickle Down. That's followed by a new production of The Sound of Music told from the point of view of the Nazis. Trust me.
Rolf gets his day.
Trust me, you don't want to hear the list of their favorite things.
This is their idea of funny, is to say, ha ha, the Republicans are Nazis.
Well, not the people who are storming colleges and preventing Jewish students from entering or leaving, or beating people up, or shouting "globalize the Intifada." Those aren't the Nazis. Remember, it's Donald Trump, Israel's best friend. Those are the Nazis. Let's all get it straight.
Well, I think if you look at it, if you actually sit and look at it from the perspective of the left, conservatives have realized over the past few years that politics is downstream from culture. However, I think the left looks at it the reverse, where culture is downstream from politics. So whatever your politics are, that's going to dictate what you think or what you believe everybody should think is funny, instead of presenting a joke and seeing if it works. Instead of doing that, here's my ideology, you need to laugh at this.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a double-edged sword. One is, I agree, and what they do isn't funny. Also, what they do often isn't truthful. And for satire to work, it has to have that kernel of truth to it. So when Nathan Lane is going on about that, it's not funny in part because it's not true. So that's why you can just sit there. It's like the recent South Park season. I love South Park. I've watched it for, decades now. And I watch this new episodes. I'm thinking, I'm not offended per se. I'm shocked that they've gone so one-sided, but it's just not funny. And that's a real problem. But the other issue is that conservatives really aren't doing enough in this arena. There's a recent scandal in Minnesota regarding fraud that's run amok. Mm-hmm. There are so many comic elements there, so many things you could exploit, and Saturday Night Live won't touch it, and late night TV won't touch it. But the right needs more avenues that they'll step into the breach and say, hey, we're going to make fun of this. So whether it's a YouTuber who's unknown today but maybe famous tomorrow, we need some people to look into that and explore it and exploit it and tap into it. And then all of a sudden, then it becomes mainstream.
Well, I think what you're trying to say is there isn't diversity in satire. There isn't equity in satire. There isn't inclusion in satire. Nobody makes fun of Ilhan Omar.
Well, if the folks out there go to the Media Research Center's Instagram page or mine, I have been at least once a week trying to hammer this Somali thing, whether it's Ilhan Omar, whether it's the failed mayoral candidate, whether it's the Jacob Fry who did multiple ad campaign messages in Somali. Like, I've been trying to hammer it at least once a week because it's so ridiculous it lends itself to comedy.
We live in a world where Jasmine Crockett exists, and no one makes fun of her on the sort of professional, slick Hollywood level. That blows my mind. Jasmine Crockett is out there code switching as far as the day is long, and Saturday Night Live won't touch her. Late night TV won't mention her. That's staggering to me.
AOC. I mean, they write they're sincere in what they're telling their constituents and their followers on social media and everything. But it's almost like they're writing shtick, because it's the things that they're saying are so ideologically backwards that, like I said before, it lends itself to jokes.
Well, I think they are performing for their social media base. I think that's there all the time. You mentioned something, Christian. It's that whole notion of how satire doesn't have something true. And when you mention Saturday Night Live, a December live open skit about Trump was basically him making jokes about how he was on both Ambien and Adderall at the same time. And it makes you remember that when Tina Fey had Sarah Palin saying, "I can see Russia from my house," people thought Sarah Palin actually said that. You do have to wonder sometimes whether satire leads to misinformation in this kind of case.
Well, it's not even just that. I mean, you brought that up. Did they do a single sketch about who left cocaine in the White House?
Which would have been a natural for the old, the Belushi era Saturday Night Live. They did skits about cocaine that at the time, as a young person, I was like, cocaine addiction's not funny, guys.
Oh, can you imagine the fun that Farley and Sandler would have had with that? Yeah. I mean...
By the way, that sketch with Tina Fey as Sarah Palin, I thought that was a watershed moment for comedy in general, because when that sketch aired, it was very well produced. She did good imitation. But when people started believing that Sarah Palin actually said that, I think that was the beacon to comedians across the landscape saying, wait a minute, we can really impact the culture. We can change hearts and minds. We could diminish a candidate with the right sketch. And I think comedy really took a hard left, hard progressive, hard partisan turn at that point, and it really hasn't recovered.
Yeah, I mean, it's you look at, for example, how would Saturday Night Live mock Hunter Biden? And the one time I recall them having a Hunter Biden in a skit, it was Pete Davidson, like on a skateboard. It was not really serious, and it takes me back to one of the worst moments, in my opinion, of the Jimmy Kimmel show, which was him having on Hunter Biden and just kissing his rings.
Well, the funny part about that is, if you look at Hunter Biden and you look at, what's his name, Pete
Davidson.
Pete Davidson, there's one thing that both of them know really well, and that's drugs.
So, I mean, I think that, I don't know if you'd call it laughaganda or whatever you would call it, but there is that concern now that satire is, it's funny how the fact checkers, the so-called independent fact checkers will go after the Babylon Bee, but they're never going to go after Saturday Night Live.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, during the Obama years, there were one or two sketches that were a little more critical of him. And remember, I think it was at least two outlets, one of them may have been the USA Today, did a fact check on the sketch. And they say, wait, no, we can't do this. You've gone too far. You're gonna speak truth to power, make sure that you get all the facts completely correct in a sketch, only because it was targeting Democrats. I mean, when did USA Today and other major institutions fact check an SNL sketch? I don't know if they ever did it.
I don't think they have. And so I wanted to shift into movies, and of course the tragic and brutal murder of Rob Reiner and his wife. That was hard to take, just the way the story unfolded. At first, there were bodies in the Reiner home. Then it was Rob and his wife. Then it turned out it was alleged his son slit their throats. I mean, it was a terrible time. And for some reason, President Trump decided it was time to say, Rob Reiner's Trump deranged. And it's like, no, your timing's off. It was beyond tone deaf. If his goal was, I want to cause 100% negative coverage of me, it certainly worked. But what I found really interesting just in the last few days, CBS had a Rob Reiner hour, CNN had a Rob Reiner hour, and I went into the snap stream and I put in the word Trump. The word Trump is in neither one of those 60-minute specials. So it's just kind of interesting to me is all of the remembrances of Reiner's life and career. They would say, oh, he was a major Democrat. But they really didn't go anywhere near the kind of things he was saying about Trump, maybe because of these Truth Social messages. But yeah, they drained some of the nastiness out of what Reiner said in politics.
Yeah, that's a tough call because I think, in the immediate aftermath of anyone's death, I do want the coverage to be kinder.
Yes.
I think there's sort of an unwritten window there where you don't really kind of dig into the negatives as much and celebrate what the person was worth. And listen, the last 20 plus years, Rob Reiner's creative output has been really awful for the most part. But his run in the 80s and 90s was just spectacular. It's very few filmmakers can match it. So, I mean, I understand. Yeah, the Trump post about him was cruel. It was incorrect. It was tone deaf. Yeah, like I said, barely even describes it. It's funny. During the first Trump presidency, there were a lot of these moments, a lot of posts that were not well thought out or cruel or just, gosh, I wish he didn't say that. And I feel like this in his second run, he's had a little more discipline. This felt like the old Trump coming back, and it was just not the thing to say.
So when they were remembering Reiner's career, I'm sure this struck you as it struck me, is that Reiner never got a Best Director Oscar nomination.
Not even nominated.
Not even nominated. Not even for A Few Good Men.
Yeah, A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
So
it's shocking. I think he had a populist streak that I don't say that to discredit him. I think it was one of his many, many strengths. So I think the popularity of his work maybe cut against him. I think sometimes Oscar voters can be serious and sober, and we want biopics and movies that address the country's ills. And I think they don't go to movies that are just flat out great sometimes. That's one of the reasons why the Oscars are cratering as far as their cachet in the public's arena. Yeah, it's almost incomprehensible that he didn't. But he worked with a lot of comedies. Comedies often get short shrift when it comes to the Oscars. Horror does as well, with some minor exceptions. So he did traffic in genres that aren't catnip to Oscar voters. But listen, who cares? Because his work speaks for itself.
I mean, The Princess Bride alone.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to talk about, obviously the Oscars have always been and always will be political. You can go back to when Marlon Brando had the Native American woman on stage and give his message or whatever. But a movie and you mentioned A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
How do you not even get nominated for Best Director for A Few Good Men?
It had the right politics.
And like I said, The Princess Bride, if you think about it, action, comedy, drama, romance, everything. It was a perfect movie. And whether you're a man or a woman, you can relate to that movie and get into it.
When you think about rom-coms, When Harry Met Sally is the gold standard.
Yep.
Yeah.
What movie is better than that? I mean, there's a lot of it that come close to it. A lot of great rom-coms over the years. That is what everyone mentions when you say, what's a great rom-com, or is it as good as When Harry Met Sally? And very few films can even get close to it.
But you mentioned one that people don't remember, and that is The Sure Thing with John Cusack and Daphne Zuniga. It reminds me again, it's like I really like John Cusack as an actor, but then in real life, his politics
might as well be called John Cossack.
yeah. I mean, I saw that movie in the theater in 1985 with a woman that later became Mrs. Graham, and we just loved it. It was just such a nice movie.
It's the kind of movie that sounds saucy and raw because the whole concept is he's going across the country to meet a girl who's quote unquote easy. There's no other way to say it. And yet along the way, he falls in love with a girl of substance. Their romance is complicated. There's lots of wonderful comic moments, great cameos, including one by Tim Robbins. It stands up beautifully. It's sweet. It's tender. It's naughty at times. And I've read stories about the actors talking about how Rob Reiner directed them, and he really had just a wonderful rapport. And listen, he was an actor himself with All in the Family, so that certainly had helped, but he really got the best out of all his performances. And you're talking about a young actors and having to carry a movie. I'm sure Cusack and Zuniga were babies back then, practically. And they're terrific. They're terrific together. They got wonderful chemistry. It's oil and water, but it actually somehow mixes. It's a sweet film that doesn't get enough attention. And listen, we get bowled over by Princess Bride and Misery and Spinal Tap and all these great movies, but that one's in there too. Don't forget it.
But you made the point that it's not streaming. You'd have to try to find the DVD.
Yeah. I don't know why that is. I got a Blu-ray copy at my house. I don't know whether it's rights. There are some titles that slip through the cracks from time to time. It's complicated. It could be a variety of factors, but boy, I think that would do great on any streaming platform.
Well, I mean, and you think about it, over the last 40 years, how many times has that movie been repeated? How many times has that formula been used over the last 40 years?
You could argue that Say Anything with Cusack was a bounce off of that. I mean, in a different way.
Well, there was a movie in the mid 90s with young Paul Rudd and I believe Reese Witherspoon called Overnight Delivery. Mm-hmm. And it had the same kind of premise. They were going across country, so Paul Rudd could sleep with his girlfriend, basically, who was away at college, and obviously on the road trip they started falling in love. So it was the same formula.
And by the way, that whole concept of a college student, a male, white, straight male going across country to have an easy encounter with a lady, you couldn't even do that today. You probably couldn't even pitch that today. And yet it's the heart of a story that shows sometimes the male sexual libido is hungry for something. It shows that, we have the potential to change as men. You have to start with that sort of naughty bit to get to the goodness of the story and the sweetness. And that final scene in a classroom is just a home run.
Well, because nowadays they want the thinking to be robotic. Everybody has to be perfect all the time. You can't make any sins. You can't say anything wrong. You always have to be in line. Otherwise, it's a no-go in Hollywood.
It's rough.
You can't change, you can't grow.
So, Christian, you made a list of the Turkey movies of 2025. 2 Robert De Niro's, but also. Sad, and I haven't seen this yet, but you had Spinal Tap 2.
Yeah, it's funny. I caught up with it recently, and then the next day, Rob Reiner was tragically murdered along with his wife. So I have to say, I definitely soft-pedaled my thoughts on the movie initially because it just was the wrong time. Spinal Tap 2 is just a disaster, and it's so sad on so many levels. First of all, it never should have been made. I mean, just the movie itself is so perfect, you leave it alone. And secondly, it's almost everything you think would go wrong with a Spinal Tap sequel does go wrong. And again, it's Rob Reiner. Listen, we all age. Maybe the fire in our belly goes away. The skill we have. I mean, there have been other directors who did great work as younger men and then in their later years couldn't capture that magic. So I think he just was one of them. But it was really rough to watch on so many levels. And when they would kind of do callbacks to the first movie and repeat the jokes and then they bring in Paul McCartney and Elton John for extended cameos and they're not funny. It's just, it's really hard to watch. And I wish Rob Reiner were alive. Wish he should have lived another 10, 20 years. But as a storyteller, his skills were gone.
I just think it's funny because when I took 2 of my high school buddies to see This Is Spinal Tap in the theater, and they didn't get it. They were just like, let's go see another movie. So then we went to see Romancing the Stone, and they were much happier.
I mean, both are good movies.
Well, it's funny. We talk about movies that age well, and I think a lot of his stuff does. But I wouldn't even introduce Spinal Tap, the first movie, to my kids because they don't really know that culture. They don't know rock. Mm-hmm. It definitely speaks to a different moment in pop culture music history. So today it does land differently for a newcomer. I will say that.
Yeah. Well, and as you mentioned that, some of the movies he made that Rob Reiner made at the end, he made a movie about white Christian nationalism. There was a lot of politics in those movies. And then in 2017, he made this movie Shock and Awe about the Iraq War and the courageous reporters who exposed George W. Bush, So once again, the later product didn't match.
Yeah. By the way, when Spinal Tap 2 was announced, I thought, oh my gosh, he's going to make it political. That's the worst thing he can do. And he didn't at all. And there's one line about Stormy Daniels as kind of a cute little throwaway moment. But I'd give him credit. He didn't go there, thank goodness. But that would have made a rough movie even worse.
Well, yes, we have to all be sad to be murdered in such a horrible way, just unimaginable.
Horrific.
And yeah, there's a lot of great movies there to watch. And so we thank you for joining us today, Christian, to
pleasure.
discuss all this. HollywoodinToto.com. If that is not on your favorites among websites, it really should be. Thank you, Nick, for coming in.
Thank you.
And so if you got to keep up with what's going on, news and comedy, you got to come to Newsbusters once, twice, 24 times a day. Thanks for listening and watching.